I always had in my mind I always had this like next. So I was always able to envision, okay, as soon as I get to this spot, the bullshit in my head is going to leave. Like as soon as this happens, it's all going to go away. I'm going to feel really confident as a writer. And I've actually reached all of those points. And all that happens is the bullshit in my head shifts into some new story. That's it. It doesn't go away. It just changes. It's a shapeshifter. And so that's where I am now. And that's how I maintain it, is that I've made peace with the fact that there will be a part of my brain that's always chattering on about how I'm an imposter and I'm not good enough and I'm going to make people upset and you should probably just go hide in a corner, whatever. It's so boring. It's boring. But I always get back to, am I writing what I want to be writing in a way that I want to be writing it? Mm-hmm. And I just kind of trust that that's all I've got. That's what I've got to give the world. It's either going to succeed or not. People are going to like it or they're not, but that's what I have. So I'm just going to focus on being the best writer I can and telling the truth as accurately as I can.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com. Janelle, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me. How are you?
I am fantastic, and it is really cool to have you back here. It's exciting to have you back here for so many reasons. I mean, you were one of the first probably 20 interviews that we did right after we changed the name of the show to Unmistakable Creative. Of course, you're actually one of the profiles that is featured in my upcoming book, Unmistakable: Why Only is Better Than Best. And I wanted to bring you back because in my mind, you really, in so many ways, as a writer, with the voice that you have, define unmistakable. Especially, anybody who has a blog with the tagline, "The Fight Against Meaningful Parenting Advice," is somebody who I am drawn to for numerous reasons. But before we get there and we start getting into all of that, I want to ask you, what early life experience or childhood memory do you think planted the seed for what you have ended up doing with your life and your work as a writer?
Oh, let's see. That's a big question. You always start right with the big ones. There's no easing in with Stringy.
Yeah.
Well, I think there was a couple things. I mean, part of it was that my mom was kind of a nomad type who, and she was she used to just do things like, and now that I'm a mother, I kind of realize how sort of crazy that is. Like, for example, she would just say, like, we would get a tax return check or something. We didn't have much money, and she'd get a little money and she'd be like, we're going to go camping. And we would pack up our car and we would just go up the coast of California and Oregon and Washington. And one time we went all the way to British Columbia and we would just camp along the way with no reservations. I mean, we would just figure it out. And I realize now that was a pretty remarkable thing to do with a couple kids and very little money. And sometimes we'd break down. And one time our car broke down in Las Vegas, and she played the nickel slot machines to get us buffets to eat for a couple days till the car could get, so we could get some money to get home. And it was kind of all these adventures that didn't make a lot of sense. And what I learned from her is that you just do what you want to do. And when things come up in your life, you just take care of them and you keep going. And I think that, I'm not sure exactly how that relates to me as a writer, but I do know that that's what gave me the ability to get started. do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wanted to write, and so I wrote, because that's what you do. You just do the things that are in you, whether or not they make sense, whether or not people are going to understand, whether or not it's going to end in disaster. You just kind of do it. And I fully learned that from my mom.
Why do you think so many people are resistant to doing that thing? Part of what I have always appreciated. Like, I mean, reading mom blogs is the last thing in the world that I want to do as a single guy.
Yeah, me too, usually.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is that there's something raw and honest and beautiful about the way you write. And that's what has drawn me to your work. But what really, I think the question is that thing that you want to do, when you want to do it, like, I think people have that inside of them, and so many people are resistant to doing it. And I'm curious, just based on the life experience that you've had, what causes that?
Because you can't see the path. Because you can't see whether or not it's going to work. And we hate that. We hate not knowing. We hate not being able to see whether or not our efforts are going to get us anywhere. Because they may not, right? I mean, let's be honest. We might sit and work and write and write and write and write, and nothing happens. Mm-hmm. And I think that nothing happening is more terrifying than not trying. And I think that that's kind of the shift that happens, that when we do actually start doing that thing, is that we say, you know what, I don't care if it ends in nothing. I would rather have the failure than this feeling of not doing the thing I want to do. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it makes plenty of sense.
And I think that that's just not really what we're taught to do, right? We're not taught to, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, Srini, like, why are we not, that side of ourselves, that side of us that craves doing something for the sake of doing it, just like something creative or something interesting, kind of, whether it's writing or painting or knitting or whatever, baking, whatever it is that we do, that's something that calls us that we're just not doing. It's like, it's not, because we don't know if it's going to make us money or we don't know if it's going to work. Somehow it's not valuable to us, which is really weird, right? Because we're not really alive very long. So it seems like trying something for the sake of doing it just because it may add an interesting element to your life would be worth our time, right? Just for that.
Yeah. It's such a sort of deep and complicated subject, because you're right. I mean, we really hate not knowing. I think the thing that we can't see at all, because when you look at what somebody has accomplished, it doesn't seem like they were a person who has had nothing and like a blank slate and a complete unknown. But I look back at 7 years, 700 interviews, and I look back at all the people that I interviewed, and in my mind, when I'm hearing you say that, I'm thinking, wow, everybody literally starts with a blank slate, with not knowing whether what they're going to do or what they're going to try is going to have a positive outcome. And that goes from published authors to no-name bloggers to billionaires.
Yes.
And I think that it's very hard for us to see that, because you don't see that part of it at all. Like, nobody witnesses that part of somebody's working process.
Completely. And yes, that's exactly right. And that's what I try to tell writers that I work with, is that that's why we have to get to the point where we're not in the business of outcomes, that we're doing the process because the process itself is what's rewarding. That the creative work itself is enough to keep us going. Just the experiment, like, we just get curious about it, right? Rather than getting kind of, of course, there's always those moments of resentment when you're like, when am I going to get mine?
Of course.
Like, we're all human, when is the work going to pay off? And obviously, it isn't that much. There's a lot of not fun in trying to earn money and support yourself while doing this other project that you're praying to God will work someday. But yeah, it is that blank slate that's terrifying. And I think it's combined, that sort of unknown and the fear of the unknown, combined with the fact that we don't really value creative work just for the sake of the work itself, results in a lot of giving up or not starting,
I think it also results in creating things that you don't really want to see exist in the world. That's another thing that comes from that. I mean, giving up, not starting, and doing work that you don't truly care about.
Gotcha. Yeah.
3 things that I've done throughout this process at certain moments.
Right.
So you mentioned something that I don't want to let go of, because I think there's a thread there. And that is the idea of those little moments of resentment, like, when am I going to get mine?
Oh, yeah.
And, as somebody who spent the better part of 7 years telling other people's stories, it's really hard not to think that frequently, because my entire perception of the world is actually shaped on people that I interview. It's like a very, like one of my mentors said, he said that's an incredibly warped perspective on the world because you're not seeing anything other than sort of the craziest high achievers imaginable.
Right.
He's
right.
like-
You're getting the apex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that sort of moment of resentment, like how do you deal with that? How do you put it to rest, more importantly? Like, I think I've finally gotten over it, but that's, here's the thing. I can say I've gotten over it, but I can tell you somebody who is listening is like, yeah, Srini, that's easy for you to say. You just got to write a book with a major publisher.
Right.
It's much easier to say it standing on this side than to believe it standing on the other side of it. So I want to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, I mean, so I started writing my blog with, so I had 2 children and then I had a baby. So I had 3 total, and I was working almost full time, I think 30 hours a week, at this law firm, and I was in graduate school. So 3 kids, grad school, working. And my husband is an iron worker. He works mostly in San Francisco, which is about a couple hours from us. And so it really made no sense for me to start this blog. And I did it because I had this burning question and I couldn't find anybody saying what I wanted to read about motherhood. So I just couldn't take it anymore. And I started writing, even though it made no sense. But it was just a hobby. I never had a single expectation. And thank God, because I would have quit really soon if I had some sort of expectation of fame or money or something. And so that worked really well for about a year or 2. Right? Because at first I started out like, I'm just writing for me. This is so much fun. I had years of topics banked in my mind, all the things that pissed me off about. I mean, I spent the first year just writing about things that pissed me off, about all the bullshit I read in the media and all this stuff about motherhood, all this preciousness, And but then after about a year, right? So now I'm writing after the kids go to bed. I'm writing in these little 1-hour windows, and nobody's reading it, and that's fine. And then about year 2, though, okay, well, now I've been writing for 2 years, and still nobody reads it. And then the questions start coming in. Why am I doing this? What is the fucking point of this work? I mean, I'm putting this work in, and I start caring. I start caring, and then I start comparing. I start reading these other blogs, and I'm reading these blogs. And I'm going, this woman has 90 million Twitter followers, and she's been writing half the time, and her writing sucks, and she just got a book deal. What the hell is this? And you start getting resentment. You start getting that, what about me? When am I going to get mine? And then I would start comparing the way I wrote with the way she wrote and the way they wrote, right? Like the capital they, the ones that were rocketed into fame. And I looked at what they said and the way they worded things and the way they did things. And I just thought, you know what? I can't do it. And I'd think, well, I should be like them. I should write like them, or I should tone it down. I mean, I know you've read my stuff. My sense of humor it offends people a lot, and I'm really irreverent, and I swear, and I say things I say things the way I want to say them. And I would think, well, Janelle, if you just tone it down, you'd be a lot more successful. But I just couldn't do it. I had other people tell me the same thing. Well, you're just too edgy. You're just, I just do this, just that. And then I would just get back to the fact that I had rather fail than be something I'm not. And I would be okay with that. And I would just say, you know what, Janelle, you're writing for the woman who wrote you last week and said, thank you so much for writing this. You keep me going. I wish I would have found you 20 years ago when I had my children. And every week, Srini, there'd be one person, maybe 2 people who would message me or write me a Facebook comment that kept me going. And I would focus on them. So I would consciously deflect away from the ego comparison wheel and focus on the few people who I felt like were really affected by my writing. And I would say, well, I'm writing for them. And I would just let that be enough.
How have you maintained that as you have grown in presence and stature? I mean, at this point, you have a pretty substantial Facebook fan base. Like I know because I follow your work. Like it's grown significantly since that point.
Right.
It's funny because I think it's easier to do that when you have nothing to lose. You get to a point where you're like, oh wow, suddenly all this shit matters. Even though it doesn't, right? But you feel like you have so much more at stake at a certain point. So I'm curious, have you struggled to maintain that perspective as your presence has become bigger? Because I know that I have.
Absolutely, I have never felt quite as. I felt more paralyzed. The only time I felt, sometimes I go through these phases where I feel like I just can't write anything, and I hate everything I write. And, and I just like everything I try to write. It just comes across as I hate it. And so I usually just end up writing, thousands of words that week, and I publish something just because I can't take it anymore. But yeah, absolutely. Because then people have their expectations, right? Like when you're writing to nobody, the story is nobody's reading me. What is the point of this? When you're writing to thousands of people, it's I'm gonna say something wrong. I'm not going to be good enough, And that, but because everybody has expectations. So some people read me and I'm the funny, I'm funny. I'm the funny girl or whatever. And then, then I'll write something heartfelt and I'll get all these followers that are like, well, they think I'm the heartfelt writer. And so no matter what I write at this point, I piss somebody off. And not in a cute way. I mean, I'll write something, God, I really liked you until you wrote this. I didn't know you were so political, or I didn't know you were so this or that. And so then, and that is really what I've learned, is that I always had in my mind this like next. So I was always able to envision, okay, as soon as I get to this spot, the bullshit in my head is going to leave. Like as soon as this happens, it's all going to go away. I'm going to feel really confident as a writer. And I've actually reached all of those points. And all that happens is the bullshit in my head shifts into some new story. That's it. It doesn't go away. It just changes. It's a shapeshifter. And so that's where I am now. And that's how I maintain it, is that I've made peace with the fact that there will be a part of my brain that's always chattering on about how I'm an impostor and I'm not good enough and I'm going to make people upset and you should probably just go hide in a corner, whatever. It's so boring. It's boring. But I always get back to, am I writing what I want to be writing in a way that I want to be writing it? Mm-hmm. And I just kind of trust that that's all I've got. That's what I've got to give the world. It's either going to succeed or not. People are going to like it or they're not, but that's what I have. So I'm just going to focus on being the best writer I can and telling the truth as accurately as I can, and then letting the world do with it what they will, Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
did I even answer your question?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was poetic. I want to ask you about one other thing. I mean, part of what really, really appeals to me about your work is that you have been willing to say what probably a lot of people are thinking, despite the amount of criticism and sort of harsh feedback that comes from it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think like you said, you polarize. Like you draw a line. People either love you or hate you, I think.
Absolutely.
And when they despise you, they despise you.
Yes.
And so I think what I want to ask about, which I think is important for our listeners because there's probably a lot of new ones since you were last here, is where the narrative of the fight against meaningful parenting advice comes from, because it's one of my favorite sort of stories about, how you've built this and what is it about you that enables you to kind of just say, you know what, I don't give a shit. I'm going to say whatever I want to say. Because that's admirable. I think a lot of people wish they could be like that. For a lot of people, that's like a drunken alter ego that maybe shows up once in a great while. Whereas that's just you, which is why I think it's so powerful. So kind of, walk us through, where does all this come from?
So where did my sort of sarcastic...
Yeah, I mean, where does the whole narrative come from? Like, what has informed this perspective, and what is it about your life that has enabled you to say things without having so much concern for what other people are thinking? Like, you're willing to say whatever you want to say without any filters, which I think is really, really brave and courageous, and it leads to really fantastic work.
Well, thank you. I mean, so the filter thing, I have to say, I was sort of born slightly without a filter. That I just sort of fell into it to some extent. I mean, there's more to it, obviously, but I never understood why people would be ashamed of the way they feel or think, because it's the truth. And I didn't understand, I truly didn't really understand that the truth was was loaded, that it was this moral, that people found that speaking truth is a kind of a radical move in a way, or not in a way, it is. And I actually remember, so this is sort of a bizarre kind of random story, but I actually remember when I kind of first observed that I was kind of born without that filter, or that, I remember I was in high school and it occurred to me that, well, anyway, I don't even really remember what led up to this, but I remember the moment that it occurred to me. You know, I was like really insecure. I think I was 15 or 16, and you know, none of the boys liked me or whatever. You know how it is. And I remember watching this group of girls on the campus, and they were acting in a way that was very different from the way they acted around me when it was just us. They were friends of mine, and they were around some boys, and they were acting a certain way. And I remember watching them, and I remember thinking, oh, they don't act like themselves, so that the boys will like them. And that's what you're not doing, Janelle. And I remember thinking, that's so crazy that they do that. Like, why? Because why would I ever want to attract a person based on a facade? Because then I would already know that the relationship was bullshit. I mean, right out of the gate. Because if I'm faking it, I'm going to attract you, and then you're going to think I'm a certain way, and then you're not going to like me for who I am. And then this relationship is never going to work. And so that's kind of how I see writing. I mean, I don't want to become some polished version of myself, because the people I'm talking to, the people that I want to read my work, are going to understand what I'm saying. And they're the only people that matter to me. I'm not interested in appealing to the masses. I'm interested in finding my people, you know? Mm-hmm. And that's how the mothering thing came about. Is that what you wanted me to talk about too?
Yeah, I would.
Okay, so the really condensed version is that I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I was separated from my children from 2007 until 2009, and when I got sober. It was about 7 years ago. And so I was sort of thrown back. So I had my first child at 22, and my second child about 4 or 5 years later. And both of those children, I was removed from both of those children for a couple of years. I was in and out of their lives. And I was very lucky to get sober and not be dead. And so I found myself at 30, sober with these children. And then at 31, my husband and I bought a house together, and our family was reunited, all four of us. And I found myself sort of catapulted into motherhood. Even though I'd already been a mother, it was not the same. And I sort of woke up, and I started walking around looking at the mothering world, and I'm seeing, so everything I saw seemed like bullshit. And I couldn't find my story. I couldn't find my experience. There were the moms who sort of had this narrative that if you just do enough research, you're going to know how to raise your kids, and it's all going to be cool. You just have to read a lot of books and apply what the experts say, and you'll be cool. But I would do that. I'd read all the books, and I would try it, and then I'd forget about it in a week, or I would, it wouldn't work, or I wasn't able to stick with the follow through. And I thought, well, that's a bunch of bullshit. You can't take, a bunch of experts in labs can't tell me how to raise this incredibly dynamic, singular human being. That's not going to work. And then there were these other moms who seemed like they just kind of didn't give a shit. Like they were like the cool kid moms, they're like, I just drink my martinis and I don't give a fuck. And I thought, well, that's not real either. Y'all, you lay your head down and feel guilty as hell too. And then there's this like precious story about, oh, motherhood is everything I've ever wanted, and I find it so infinitely fulfilling. And that was definitely not my experience. I mean, I was always stuck in this weird gray area of, I love being a mother. I'm so grateful for these kids, but I'm also not infinitely fulfilled by them, and I want to pursue other areas of my life, and I've never felt erased by motherhood. I've never I never felt like I disintegrated into, play dates and sippy cups and carpools being enough. And I'm not knocking that at all. It's just my experience that I was never felt fulfilled by that. I've always felt like I'm a person and I happen to be a mother, but first and foremost, I'm an individual and I'm not defined by, the fact that I have these children. And I just couldn't find anybody writing that, Srini. I couldn't find anybody letting that gray area exist where I would lay down my life for my kids and sometimes I want to throw myself in front of a bus. Like I am infinitely fascinated by you and completely bored by you at the same time. Like I don't want to hear more kid chatter. I want to talk about something else. At the same time, so incredibly grateful to be reunited with my family. And I just couldn't take it anymore because I thought I just wanted to know if there are other mothers like me. That's it. I didn't, I was okay if there weren't. If I was the freak on earth, there was just one of me, that's fine. But I wanted to know if there were other women who felt like I did. Mothers, not all women are mothers. So I wanted to know if there were other mothers. And so I decided that I was going to write the absolute truth of my experience. And it was okay. No matter how hypocritical, no matter how irreverent or offensive, I was going to say the things that I thought about motherhood in an unfiltered way to achieve the experiment, right? To test my hypothesis, which was, everybody's full of shit, frankly. And the results blew my mind. Yeah. So that's how it started.
So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are clean every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable. All right, lots of questions come from this. It's interesting to listen to you talk about how we put on this facade for the world in the hopes that they will like who we are. Right. And yet what we're trying to get them to like is the facade. And I think in my mind, that starts really early in life. I mean, you mentioned high school. And yes. I think we make choices like that throughout our lives until what we are mired in are labels and stories and masks. And in my mind, and I wrote this in my book, and I believe it even more now than when I wrote it, is that half the spiritual journey of adulthood is unraveling all this bullshit to get us back to that sort of pure place that we were at in our childhood or before all of these sort of things were kind of dumped on us from the world and the experiences around us.
Mm-hmm.
The other question. So, we spoke quite a bit about sort of your past and the alcoholism and being separated from children in our previous interview. I'm curious, what has been the impact on the relationship that you have with your kids as a byproduct of that experience? And then the other is, I mean, that's a really, really dark chapter to go through. So this is probably going to end up being 3 questions in one, but you should be used to that by now. So, it's a really, really dark period in your life. Mm-hmm. So if somebody is in a moment like that, what would you tell them? And then the third one, which I've asked on a number of interviews, and this has been, for some reason, of particular interest to me because, lots of situations have come up over the last year that have required a lot of resilience and faith. Do you think that the ability to develop the kind of resilience and the grit that you have is the byproduct of having gone through the experiences that you have? So I realize 3 questions, so feel free to answer for as long as you want.
What was the first one, though? I missed the first one.
Okay, so the first one I think was really more of a comment about sort of layers and masks and how you let go of all of that. The second one was so first one, what is the impact that this separation has had on your relationship with your children?
Okay.
So let's start.
Well, I think that the very deepest vein of impact is that there is never a day that passes that I'm not extremely grateful for what my life looks like. Maybe that's a little exaggeration. Maybe I forget sometimes, but there aren't. Everybody has days where you're like, is this really it? Is this really it? But I always go back to remembering that people like me don't end up like this. And I do a lot of work with other alcoholics to remember that on a regular basis. That if I go back to drinking, that's it for me. And I spend a lot of time with people who were recently living on the streets and people who are on their way to prison for alcohol and drug related crimes. And I try to give back what was given to me in terms of freedom from this condition. And that goes into my family a lot, right? Because no matter how frustrated I get, or no matter how tired I get, I always end up at, thank God. And the other thing that I think has flowed into my family because of this and my relationship with my children is that the gig is up in terms of their mother's imperfection. I can't hide behind some structure of perfection or infinite reliability as a mother. And I don't try, because I am a broken person, and I really messed up in incredibly non-cute ways. I mean, there's no way to spin alcoholism and drug addiction and as a mother and being separated from your children into something noble or something, not horrifyingly sad and destructive and painful. And so I don't pretend with my kids. I don't give them more than they can handle in terms of, I don't tell them about all these things, but I also come at them from a very real place, and I will apologize and I will tell them when I'm wrong, and I treat them I guess what I'm saying is, I think that there's a narrative in the world that once we have children, we become these incredibly glowing version of ourselves. And I think that sometimes carries into the way we parent, where we act like we have to pretend to be perfect to get our kids' respect so that we can discipline them when they're teenagers. And, do you know what I mean? Like, if we aren't perfect, what's going to happen to our kids? And I've been set free from that because everybody knows I'm not perfect. That's out of the bag. So I don't pretend with my kids, and I am very honest with them when I screw up, and when I'm weak, and when I blow it. And so we have an extremely honest household. And in fact, I was really kind of delighted the other day. My oldest child is almost 15, and she said, we were driving to school the other day, and she was talking to me about some stuff, and she said, Mom, I don't think other families are like ours. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, we talk about everything in this family, and I tell you things because I know you're not going to freak out. And I thought that was really cool. She said, I don't think my friends talk to their moms the way I talk to you. And I thought that was pretty cool. So maybe I'm flattering myself, but I think that our family has just sort of, the walls have already been torn down, and we're all really happy to be together. And there's an honesty and realness, I know, is what saved my life. And so that's what I keep going. I can't pretend things. Yeah. So, what was question 2?
Question 2 was, you managed to navigate, an incredibly dark period of your life. I mean, something that I can't even fathom. And, I dedicated an entire chapter in the book to dealing with things like this, because I think it's tremendously important. I mean, somebody listening to this is probably going through something dark that you and I can't fathom. And maybe it's not even dark by any standards, comparing our grief to other people's, I've realized is kind of bullshit,
right?
Because it is what it is. One of my mentors said, he's like, it's the worst thing in the world because it's happening to you.
Totally.
But, what would you say to them having had the perspective that you have?
Well, at the risk of sounding kind of woo-woo, which I hate,
you and me both.
I will say what I have learned, which is that everything we need is within us. And I would tell that to the person who is suffering, that you may not be able to see it right now, and you may not be able to find it or even define it, but the solutions to our problems are not external. And I spent a lot of years searching for peace and meaning outside of myself, and I couldn't find it. And the more I couldn't find it, the more I drank in search of that. And what I learned was everything I need is within, and I have access to that. But the path to finding that, of course, is each of ours on our own, right? Mm. That's the bitch. That's the bad part. Is that I don't think there's any way to teach that. But I do think that life gives us what we need to learn that process, to learn that we are whole already, and we've got what we need. We just have to rely on it. Mm. And for me, it was trying a million other things and then having them all fail, and then ending up at, well, I guess if this is my only chance at staying alive and having a decent, a relatively decent life, I guess I'm just going to have to rely on whatever it is inside of me and hope it's enough. So, I would also say look for the teachers because my life was saved by teachers, people who were willing to remind me of who and what I am, even through my bullshit. You know what I mean? Because I think that the universe always hands us what we need to grow and to get better. And if we get broken enough, we'll start listening. That's what happened to me, at least. I thought I knew everything, and my life started changing when I realized I didn't know shit, and I started listening to other people, and I started letting go of some of the ideas I had about everything, frankly.
Okay, the third question is, does this kind of resilience only come about from having gone through difficult times? Because, and I'm wondering if I'm just asking this question because I'm trying to find somebody to say no, because there's not one person who has yet, which is making me think maybe it's just a bullshit loaded question. But based on kind of your perspective, what do you think? Like, do you only gain the kind of strength that you do from going through something that breaks you?
I mean, I would say yes, because I feel like without the impetus, why would we change? I mean, why do we do anything, right? I mean, when we're comfortable, we're comfortable. So why would we get uncomfortable? Just because for me, all of the biggest change in my life has come from really, from periods of deeply uncomfortable times, right? So, and I don't know if we pursue that discomfort and having our world kind of shattered on purpose.
Yeah. Because
why would we? It kind of goes against. But at the same time, as you say, pain is relative. So, I don't think that people have to be utterly shattered to have the kind of bullshit stripped away and to start living in a way that more closely aligns with who they are and what they want and what truth is to them. But I do think that it's the struggle and the willingness to be honest in that struggle and not run from it that results in the resilience. I think you do have to kind of be put through the ringer to get perspective.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think that that's true.
I don't know if you've heard of this. It's interesting because it's in one of our former guest Patty Dye's books. I think it's either Life is a Verb or one of our other books about it's about the geography of loss. Mm-hmm. And she talks about this Japanese art form. It's a form of pottery, and what happens is the pots are cracked and then put back together again, but the cracks are sealed with gold paint, and so they end up looking much more beautiful after they've been broken.
Wow.
Which is, like, and I remember I'd heard that, before, and I remember thinking, I was like, wow, that is, it's really such a beautiful sort of way of looking at some of our most difficult and dark things that happen. And I think that we're deluding ourselves. This is, I realized I'd gotten to a point where I'm like, I'm living in a fucking delusional world if I think nothing bad is ever going to happen. Like, it's just not going, like, you don't go through life like that. It's not possible.
No. Right. And that's the thing, is that, pain is relative, and what my pain is, I don't think that people have to be utterly leveled to have, but I do think that people have to have the willingness to face what's happening directly, to not run from, to get out of the delusion, like what you said.
Yeah. Well, let's do this. This is getting a little depressing, so let's shift gears.
Totally.
I want to start talking about voice in particular, which is why I wanted to bring you back. I mean, you've kind of touched on some of it by talking about truth and honesty. But I mean, like I said, your voice is unmistakable. I could probably read one thing you wrote and say, okay, the only person who would have written that is Janelle. And the thing that's interesting to me is looking back at sort of how it's been developed. And so maybe let's do this, because I know you've referenced them in our previous interviews, but I want to start there again because it was such a fascinating look. Let's talk about artistic influences. The people that have shaped your perspective and informed your voice and how you write. I know there have been musicians. I know there have been writers. So talk to me about some of that. And then talk to me about how people find those influences in their life.
Well, let's see. The writers that really have blown me away, but okay. So I have a master's and BA in English, so I've read a lot. But the really early influences, the writers that I read where I was just going, holy shit, were definitely Hemingway. And with him, it was how sparse his language is. I mean, there's so little embellishment, and he repeats words, and the way that he writes is just, and he's one of those too, where he's completely polarizing, right? People either love him or hate him. But for me, it was the way he said things. He just let them be what they are. And it became clear later. I didn't realize that I was reading this when I was, 12 or 13, but later, after I've sort of studied and read other things about Hemingway, he was trying with all of his might as a writer to get to the truth of what he was describing. Like, he wanted the moment itself to be enough without the elaboration of all the adjectives and adverbs and all the crap we add to our writing, thinking we're sounding more clever and more profound, when really we're just getting clunky. We're just making our reader do a bunch of work. And we're actually, getting away from the power of the moment itself, if he's describing fishing or the forest or something, trying to get to the truth of what it's like to stand in a forest is such a more powerful exercise as a writer than trying to describe the forest beautifully. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and then of course, Jerry Garcia, I mean, his music, Bob Dylan, a lot of music. When I was a kid, we listened to a lot of music, and, the power of the ability to just evoke this emotion in you where it resonates in your bones, right? Like you listen to the song, you listen to these words, and you don't even really understand what they're saying, but you know what they're saying. You know it because it's hitting you at some level that maybe you didn't even know existed. And and then later on, it was Toni Morrison and David Sedaris and, Toni Morrison, holy shit, right? And so that, I think, has kind of become the drive for, if I had to kind of embody what I'm trying to do with my writing, it is to get to the truth of the moment and to affect people, to resonate with people on that sort of deep, deep human level that may or may not be conscious, right? It's that deep where we just connect. We go, I know that. I know what they're saying, and I don't even know why I know it. And in terms of finding those influences, just read what you like. Yeah. Just read what you love, and don't care what other people think about it, right? Just read what you love. And, but I mean, I think that that more than anything, I developed my voice by writing for years and years and years and years to no audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think consuming is huge, but I think practice is even more powerful.
I would have to agree.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, our new book, Unmistakable, Why Only is Better Than Best, comes out next week. And if you yourself have aspirations of writing a book, it actually starts with building an online presence of some sort, like a website or a blog. In fact, learning to build a website is probably one of those skills that will always be useful no matter what you do with your life and career. And our friends at HostGator can help you to get started with 30% off their hosting packages and a super easy to use website builder. So visit hostgator.com/creative and use the promo code creative for 30% off all of their hosting packages. One of the things that comes from that, it's interesting because I touched on this in the book a little bit. I talked about this idea that Austin Kleon has coined, of stealing like an artist, of borrowing from other people. But part of what I see and part of where I see people challenged, which really kind of was, what led to the ethos of Unmistakable as a book, was that people would see people that they admire or look up to. And in the attempt to model, they would end up mimicking.
Yes.
And it drove me crazy.
Yeah, it's terrible.
It's actually, one of the number one reasons I turn down people for being guests on the show is very much that. If I feel like, okay, I've seen this before,
right.
It looks like something else I've seen 100 times. I am really curious how you borrow from multiple art forms and at the same time make it your own.
Well, I don't consciously borrow from art forms. I just consume what I love and know that it will influence my brain. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, like, if you read a boatload of an author, your brain is making connections and language connections, and it's starting to learn rhythms, and it's starting to learn new ways to form sentences. I mean, for example, you read like Virginia Woolf. I don't adore Virginia Woolf, but she has some of the most poetic, her sentences can be a paragraph long and they just flow, right? So you learn about rhythm, you learn about how to combine phrases, you learn, and then you learn Hemingway, you read Hemingway, it's like you write incredibly sparse sentences, you write short sentences, and, you read some Bukowski and you learn about voice and character. And so I'm not consciously going, hey, I'm going to go read some Hemingway so I can write sparse narrative. So I just try to consume a ton and know that will influence my work. Wait, what was the second part of what you asked? I'm sorry.
No, I think that's it. How do you make it your own? How do you take that and make it your own?
The way I make it my own is that I write the way I want it to be written. And that is so simple, Srini, that it's excruciating. But but the way it plays out is that when we sit down to write, we just write it like we want to say it. And it's like so hard. So in other words, what that looks like is if we think it's funny, we say it. We say it in the way that we think it's funny. If we think it's messed up, we write it with all the passion that we think, that we want to write it with. And we write it in the voice. And I tell people to write as if they're writing to their best friend. Like if they're writing an email to their best friend. And, Stephen King says you write with the door shut and you rewrite with the door open. So the first draft, the first thing we produce should be written for ourselves. And that's it. We should forget about the audience. And that is so hard to do. And yet that's what gives our writing power.
I love that. It's funny. You said, write letters like you're writing with a best friend. It took me back to a memory of college. When I would try to avoid studying, I would send these really long emails to one of my best friends from college. Right. And it was so weird because I was thinking, wow, that, believe it or not, is where the seed for this whole writing thing got planted. It was one of the many seeds, but that was a big one. And, I can only connect that now to almost 20 years later.
Right. Because the thing is people think that vulnerability, right, is like writing these really deep cathartic things, like, oh, if I share about my alcoholism, I'm being super vulnerable. And okay, to an extent that's true. Okay, fine. Like, all right, sure. That's vulnerable. But to me, the times that I feel the most laid bare are when I'm trying to be funny. Right? Like if I write something that I think is really funny, I immediately, because why? Because what if nobody else thinks it's funny? I write about alcoholism. Sure, people are going to be mean to me, but it's a standard kind of, right? Like, people are going to say you're a loser, you don't deserve your kids, whatever. People are going to misunderstand me. And those are kind of the standard, that's what we get when we put writing in the world. But for me, the real vulnerability is when I let my personality onto the page, because that's what the shell is gone, right? That's when I'm putting myself out there and hoping that they think I'm funny. I'm hoping they like me. And to me, but that is also where all of the power comes, because that's how we attract other people who think that's funny. Do you know what I mean? Like if I think something's really strange is funny and I go, oh, nobody else is going to think this is funny, I can't say this. And I go, ah, well, fuck it. And I write it anyway and I publish it. Other people start reading that and they go, oh my gosh, I didn't know other people thought that was funny. And they read it and a connection is built. And that's what gives our writing power, because we become human. Our personalities are on the page and other people recognize us and they recognize themselves and they feel seen and they feel heard. And then we as writers feel seen and heard, and it keeps us going. But I think what happens instead is that we open our computers and we're about to write and we go, okay, how do I want to present myself? How do I want to present myself to be safe? Because if we create a persona, we create this sort of shell, we know that the world is going to bump up against that shell instead of us. And then our writing loses power,
Wow. Okay. So,
sorry, I kind of took that off.
No, that was phenomenal. I want to start wrapping things up, but I want to ask, you brought up practice earlier.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what does your sort of daily practice, ritual, habit system look like for writing and producing work?
Now or before?
Now is fine.
Okay, so now about a year ago, so I was teaching community college and English at this local state school for a few years, and then about a year ago, I decided that I was either going to be a writer or not, and I quit teaching and I rented at least a little office, and now I write in my office. So I try to write every day. I don't really write on the weekends, but I try to write every work day. And I have a few projects I'm working on, but I've had to learn when my creative time is, when my brain is most interested in doing that creative work, which for me, oddly, is the afternoons. I always thought it was the morning, but through looking at the pattern of my life, I realized I was wrong. And so what I do is I block everything down from about 1 to 3. And I even got an app that shuts down the internet because I have no self-control. And I just write. I try to write a certain number of words. Mm-hmm. I'm driven by the number. So for example, I need to write 1,500 words on this project, and I will write until I've written those 1,500 words. So I'm kind of methodical about it. I'm not super romantic about it.
I think you and I share that in common.
Yeah.
That's kind of my whole thing is just a system, because it's the only thing I can depend on.
Totally. And if I relied on inspiration, I'd never write a goddamn thing. No, that's not true. I would write like once or twice a month.
Yeah.
And that's not enough to have a writing career.
Yeah.
And I've always been that way. Even when I started the blog, even when when I had, I was doing other work and had kids and, really young kids, even babies and stuff, I decided I was going to write 2 blog posts a week, no matter what. And I absolutely would not waver on that. So if it was Sunday afternoon, it was Sunday evening at 11 p.m. and I didn't have my second blog post in, I would write it. Even if it was crap, it meant more to me to hit that goal and to keep on that path. Obviously you screw up sometimes, but you always have to get on and get back on. And I firmly believe that if people start writing on a regular basis for multiple years, interesting things will start happening to them. I really believe that.
Yeah, well, I you don't have to convince me of that.
Yeah, but that's not very it's not very romantic. So no. I think people we want to start writing and be launched into fame and wealth and but I feel like just opening that, just cracking that window a tiny bit and letting that creative work come in and making it and looking at it like a responsibility rather than just this sort of wee fun little thing we do, and looking at it as a responsibility and a job in a way. It's strange, right? It's so weird, but that's where the magic lies. It's so bizarre. I never would have understood that. I never would have expected that. That just the act of committing myself to a writing practice and publishing that writing on a regular basis for multiple years would result in amazing things or even interesting things.
Yeah, but it does. All right. So one last question to wrap things up. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
Well, I think it is the voice. I mean, I think it is when you see somebody who's saying something in a way that they want to say it, and even if it's polarizing, even if it's wrong, I mean, that's a big part of it, is a willingness to be wrong, the willingness to put something out, knowing that you don't know what you don't know, which is really hard. I mean, we can't be more than we are. We can't know more than we know at this very moment that we're writing the words. And so when I see somebody willing to just say it, I am drawn to that, whether or not I agree with them. And you'll notice that sometimes people's best writing is like some sort of off-the-cuff Facebook post or something where there's very low stakes. Mm-hmm. Because they aren't trying to impress. They aren't trying to be profound. They aren't trying to be super clever. They just thought of something and they wrote it. They just let themselves onto the page. And Srini, that's what I want to see. I want to see people's humanity. I want to see the way they struggle. I want to see the way they have made it in spite of the struggle, not erasing the struggle. And when people are willing to do that, when people are just willing to be weird, to take some risks, to get a little reckless, and knowing that they may fail, and knowing that maybe nobody's listening, and that they're not that big of a deal, right? There's a certain playfulness that comes onto the page when people are that way. That to me is unmistakable, because so many of us we're just trying to play it safe, and we're trying to appeal to the widest audience possible. We're trying to get the most numbers, the most likes, the most shares, the most this. And what I've learned is that I don't need the world to like me. I need my audience to like me, right? And that's enough. And, I can close with this or we can chat more, whatever, but this really came into, it became really clear to me in November. I was contacted by 3 Arts Entertainment, and I was signed by a manager there. And one of the things that I've always felt sort of, quote unquote, ruined or messed up my chances of really being rocketed into those like superpower people who have, 80 gazillion followers, and is that my sense of humor is just kind of fucked up. Like, I write really sarcastic things. I talk a lot of shit. If people, I can't not call out what I think is complete bullshit. And I sort of do that in I guess a sort of offensive way, although I mean, when I write political posts and things on race or gender or feminism, I get the standard pushback. But when I write a comedy piece, a satirical piece or a sarcastic piece, I get straight up death threats. I mean, that's the stuff that pisses people off. And I know that my sense of humor is kind of wacky and it's kind of jacked up. And so I knew that was kind of one of the things that made me not palatable to a wide audience. And then I was signed by 3 Arts. Well, 3 Arts produces The Office and The Mindy Project, but particularly The Office. I have been obsessed with The Office since it came out. I love that show so much it makes me almost want to throw up. And now I'm part of the company that helped make that happen. So now there's all like really interesting projects happening, none of which I can talk about, but I'm working with my idols. I'm working with the people who, I'm not working with the staff of The Office. Don't get me wrong, right? My point is just that connection, the whole, that they saw in my writing what they love too. And so I was attracted to, and I was attracted by the people that needed to see me. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And if I had changed that, if I had softened my voice or softened my sense of humor and gone more mainstream or gone more, clean and vanilla, I would have obliterated finding my people. And I never would have known that, right? I never would have known that there is so much power in just letting yourself be your fucked up self and letting it be enough and hoping something cool happens.
Amazing. I think that just makes a beautiful and fitting way to wrap up our conversation. First, I can't thank you enough for coming back to share all of this with our listeners. This has been just mind-blowingly cool,
Nice.
packed with so much value and insight and just funny and insightful. Where can people learn more about you?
Oh, my blog, Renegade Mothering. Yeah.
Very cool.
It's just renegademothering.com, and I write about all kinds of stuff. And as I say, I've got some other projects happening that will be launched soon, but I can't talk about them yet. So
Very cool. Well,
I'm sure everybody's on the edge of their seats.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming back. I'm so thrilled that we got to feature your story in our upcoming book. And
Thank you so much
for a very good reason. I mean, based on the conversation we just had. So again, thank you so much. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that.